begin, I would like to talk about a little bit about refugee context in general around the world. And what is this context and how is this changing perhaps? So as we all know, the number of refugees worldwide is rising. By 2021, before the Ukraine crisis, we already had nearly 82.4 million people, including 26.4 million of them who were acknowledged as refugees. So 82.4 million people were foreseeably displaced worldwide. 26.4 million of them were recognized by the UNHCR, and their cases were already processed. The rest of them were waiting. Among the 26.4 million people who are recognized as refugees by UNHCR, about 1.4 million of them, mostly children, are in urgent need of resettlement. However, in years 2018 up to 21, in that 3-year period, we only know that nearly 157,000 people were resettled in a final country, and the rest of the people were just waiting. Often top destination countries for resettlement of refugees are including Canada, Australia, United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany. Apart from these countries, many of those that are recognized as refugees, the 26.4 million people that I just mentioned, many of them before final resettlement, they actually move across borders to many other countries, usually neighboring countries. And for example, many Syrian refugees have crossed the borders and are now living as refugees in Turkey. And many, for example, people from Afghanistan have crossed the borders and are now living in Iran. So apart from these top destination countries that I mentioned that often formally resettle refugees, but in very smaller numbers, we have other countries that host a huge number of refugees. But as we know, children comprise more than half of those resettled. So these top destination countries that formally resettle refugees often give permission to entry of children and very young people, and sometimes women and their families, like single mothers. Let's have a look at the Australian context. Since 2000, more than 320,000 humanitarian visas have been issued in Australia. When we talk about humanitarian visas, we're predominantly talking about refugee visas, okay? Probably over 95% of humanitarian visas are allocated for refugees. There might be other sort of smaller cases for other categories. But most of these people with refugee background, most of the people we refer to them as refugees who enter Australia eventually become Australian permanent residents and citizens. For example, recently in the case of the Ukraine refugee crisis, we know that the Australian government have admitted so far about 5,000 people from Ukraine, and an addition of 10,000 more people are expected to arrive within the next 6 months. Apart from this, starting the Afghanistan crisis last year again, Refugee Council of Australia and many other humanitarian activists and organizations across Australia are pushing the government and proposing that the government needs to increase the cap for accepting additional number of refugees and to bring the numbers back to what it was before 2013, which is usually about 20,000 per year. Once refugees are resettled, the complexities and challenges that surround their life and their well-being doesn't end. In a new country of resettlement such as Australia, there are still many challenges and sort of puzzles that these people have to sort out in order to achieve a better life and be able to maintain it in a sustainable way. One of the main aspects of this kind of challenges and complexities are related to finding decent work, finding employment that is meaningful and also sustainable, which all translates and connects well to career development as we know it. But why do we have to attend to the issue of career development for these people, meaningful employment for these people? I guess beyond the social justice imperative that is inherent in our field, in career practice, in career development, I think it's important to recognize that by attending to young people with refugee backgrounds and generally refugees, career development, supporting them with meaningful employment, by doing that, by attending to this importance, what we are doing is that we are directly contributing to the Australian economy. Actually, there were reports published a few years ago that outlined how increasing the number of refugee intake in Australia could contribute positively to the Australian economy. Okay. However, support is needed in career practice to actually promote meaningful, sustainable employment, to make sure that they're not facing unemployment, underemployment quite repetitively, and to reduce welfare reliance. Okay. As we know, people with refugee backgrounds, before being resettled in a country like Australia, they have often spent quite a number of years in transitions in different countries, in different contexts. So they do have the ability to transition with what is often referred to as the ability to be adaptable, to be flexible. Okay, so this is a sort of characteristic that we often expect that people with refugee backgrounds have. And we know that in our field, career adaptability is defined as the ability to change and fit into new or changing circumstances without great difficulty. So there is some sort of an expectation that this group of people do have quite a high degree of adaptability. We also know that for successful career development in the 21st century, career adaptability has been highlighted as a vital competency. And to make successful transitions, all right, as the world of work shifts and people go through more transitions. So career adaptability has 5 dimensions, and the 5 dimensions of career adaptability, when we look at the context of people with refugee backgrounds, we see that even by the time that many of these young people are living in a refugee camp, they are concerned about their future. So previous research that we did with this population sort of clarified how their dimensions of concern and curiosities were very present, even when they were telling us about their stories of living in a refugee camp, how they were sort of concerned about future careers, future employment, what fields they want to work in, and what might be possible for them, even living in a refugee camp. We know that the dimension of control talks about making decisions, pursuing new pathways, learning new skills. And a lot of those characteristics were also available when we listened to these young people telling us about how living in a refugee camp, they also managed to achieve some of these things and take some control. And eventually they told us about how confidence develops over time, both in the pre-migration and post-migration context. Even living in a refugee camp, living in the transitory countries such as Malaysia, and eventually cooperation also. The cooperation dimension of career adaptability is often ignored when we use the recent measures of career adaptability, often drop that cooperation dimension in the work that Mark Savickas did. And however, some research recently emphasized that the cooperation dimension is pretty useful, especially when working with people from collectivist backgrounds. And I'll talk more about that later. So thinking about this, there will be some sort of a problem probably emerges, is that despite experience of all these numerous transitions and their experiences in protracted migration journey that sometimes takes probably about 10 to 15 years in transitions, young people with refugee backgrounds still face challenges with their career development after resettlement. So if they're adaptable, what is it that they can't use those adaptabilities to navigate the world of work in Australia? All right, so what is the relationship of career adaptability and career development for these people? What is the role of career adaptability dimensions for them? So before and after resettlement, does career adaptability manifest in their migration context? We had some ideas from previous research, but we wanted to actually explore this further and make sure that we do this with some sensitivities about their systems of influence in the pre-migration, post-migration context. So we started to say that we need to consider the influence of the wider context on career adaptability. That's why we did a systemic exploration on career adaptability. I'll talk about that. So this was our research. We did some qualitative and systemic research on young refugees' career adaptability. And we tried to systemically and qualitatively explore the 5 dimensions of career adaptability this time. We worked with 5 young refugees in a number of interviews, but this research solely focused on one of those interviews. And we were very curious about what it is that they call career development. What is subjective career development from their point of views in those complex and ever-changing personal, social, geographic, and socio-political systems of influence. And I'll talk about the systems of influence, the word that I'm using, what it is. And see whether we could reveal manifestations of career adaptability through their migration journey. So this is the journal article that we published. So if you want to have a look at that later, that talks a bit more about research, obviously. But just to talk about the findings, before I do that, I also need to talk a little bit about the systems theory framework of career development. Systems theory framework reflects the complex and ever-changing personal, social, geographic, and socio-political systems of influence on every person's career development. Okay, so it considers 6 categories of influence, or 6 systems of influence. It comprised of individual systems, social system, environmental, societal systems, recursiveness between all these 3 initial systems, change over time, how change over time impacts and influences people's career development, and also the role of chance, how chance factors also play a role in people's career development. So when I say we did a systemic exploration, is that our exploration, our work with these young people involved a systemic exploration that we stage by stage looked at each one of these categories of influence, each one of these 6 different systems of influence. Here is a sample, a little bit to clarify the analysis. Okay, I'm not going to talk about what we did, but a few sample participant narratives are here. And you can see 4 different excerpts from 4 of the participants. For each one, you can see that at one stage, we identified some of the dimensions of career adaptability that were evident. And then in the second stage, we looked at the SDF of career development to determine which systems of influence were operating for those career adaptability dimensions. So I pause a little bit. Maybe you can read at least 1 or 2 of these excerpts. Okay. So now I'll move to the next slide. Just to give a better sense of our findings, let's focus only on one of the participants' life career stories so that we can provide examples of the career adaptability dimensions that emerged as she was telling us about her migration context and her journey. We can also see how, as we look at these excerpts, that we go through them, and I'll tell you more about this participant's story, you can see how various systems of influence interact with the 5 dimensions of career adaptability. I'll talk more about that. So the one participant that we chose here her pseudonym is Asima. We'll look at the 5 of the excerpts from her interviews, 4 of them in this slide. As we go through these, we will become more familiar with her life career stories, and we will become more familiar with the migration journey and then the career adaptability. So, okay, so her story of career adaptability began when she started to tell us about her experiences at a refugee camp where she spent nearly 13 years before moving to Australia. So she talked about becoming curious in the refugee camp about the type of work that accountants and business managers do. Okay, that's the first sort of instance that we had sort of concern. She said it was when she was only 10, so by the age of 10, and how a few years later, she developed concerns for learning about business management any chance she got, which included thinking about future education in this area. So let's have a look at excerpt 1. I'm not going to read it, I'll leave that to you. So she talked about constantly being on her toes at the refugee camp when she saw businesswomen on TV, or how the curiosity dimension remained highly active in the refugee camp. So she told us a lot of stories about that curiosity. So let's consider excerpt 2. Okay, and gradually, in addition to the curiosity and concern dimensions, there is stories of career adaptability started to reflect a strong presence for the cooperation dimension and how interacted with the concern dimension, like it was linked, they were linked between cooperation and concern. This is now related to excerpt 3. Okay, and so eventually she found work as a retail person in the nearby town's pharmacy, and it was the first time the dimension of control emerged in her stories. All right, I'm going to move to the next slide. I think I need to move a little bit quicker. Now, after coming to Australia, she did all she could to be an entrepreneur. The 5th excerpt here is an example of how the 3 dimensions of concern, control, and curiosity were all interacting within the individual and social systems as she reflects on her personality and interest, okay, following a chance event as well, that she started her own business. So my hope is that by providing all these examples, we can see how all of the dimensions of career adaptability interact with each other. And just a minor addition that Asima has been successfully running her business for the past 4 years in Australia. She's doing very well and her business has expanded. But overall, our research illustrated how the 5 dimensions of career adaptability interact within the migration journey, in all the stages of the migration journey. And to do this, the SDF of career development provided a very useful vantage point. Okay. Our research was probably the first to qualitatively study career adaptability among young people with refugee background. It was also the first that used the SDF of career development in researching this population. One of the outcomes was that we started to look at career adaptability as a process deeply embedded in various systems of influence, as a dynamic and changing construct that pretty much fluctuates depending on contextual factors. We learned about the overlapping influence of changing personal, social, socio-political systems that shape career adaptability at different stages of the migration journey. We also learned that we need to view career adaptability beyond the point in time personal traits, for example, that by measuring it, we can evaluate someone's readiness. We can consider it more as a lifelong construct that is always possible to change. For these people, things are always changing. So their career adaptability is highly fluctuating all the time, depending on which contexts, which stages of their migration journey, which systems are interacting and influencing their career adaptability. So simply measuring it and then making inferences based on that point in time measurement may not do much when working with these people. Okay, so particularly since they're always facing systemic challenges and disadvantage, their access to resources and career exploration opportunities are limited, and they have limited volition with their education and career pathways. Okay, so because we saw that as these young people transition through various environments, they face different challenges and they maybe have different opportunities also at different stages. So the potential for developing some of the dimensions of career adaptability was always dependent on those systems. And a little bit on the implications for practice, we propose that the first implication to consider for career practice with this population could be about the role of storytelling, facilitating, about the importance of facilitating career storytelling when there are our clients. Obviously, the role of qualitative, narrative, collaborative approaches in career counseling and practice have been already emphasized, I think, over the past couple of years. But I think the findings of this research emphasize this further, that especially when we work with these participants coming often from collectivist cultural backgrounds and those who are less privileged with their careers and their accessibility, we can see that by facilitating storytelling, we could make the exploration of career adaptability also possible. That probably this means through such storytelling, there are opportunities become available for clients to potentially connect better with their career adaptability dimensions, to gain some kind of awareness about these dimensions. Okay, for example, clients may talk about their skills, about their abilities, or a particular interest they have, and it's in those moments, in those acts of storytelling, that a career practitioner can highlight any dimension of the career adaptability they notice. We might hear about a client being concerned about something. We highlight it in our reflections. We hear them talk about cooperation with others and how, for example, a client values a particular role model and the role of others and how that other helps them be more flexible or navigate transition. We could highlight that in our reflection. So while facilitating career storytelling, career practitioners could stay alert about their demonstration of the career adaptability dimensions in any current or past context. So that can be linked to one or a few of the career adaptability dimensions. So as a result of such awareness, highlighting all of these career adaptability dimensions, inviting client reflectivity, new conversations with the clients could emerge, and those new stories to be constructed. Stories about their skills, their abilities, their values, some of the concerns they have, and then all of this could be contributed to thickening of career adaptability dimensions. One other thing that this research made clear, and that's my last point, was the role of the systems theory framework of career development towards having rich career storytelling conversation. I think if we wonder where to begin, process of career storytelling facilitation with refugees, I think STF of career development and its diagram, we can even use the diagram, it could be a very useful tool. And the usefulness of STF, again, with culturally and contextually diverse clients have been emphasized before, but again, in the context of working with refugees, this was the first time, and I think it offers great potential for facilitating these rich cultural and contextual conversation. Yeah, I'm now almost done with my presentation. That's it. I think I've even gone beyond point in time, but yeah, I'm ready to answer any questions if there are any.
Brilliant. I'm sure there'll be loads, Peyman. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. And there were some really just evocative and beautiful things about my practice I sort of was reflecting on as you spoke. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I just in the interest of time, I wonder if people could put their question in the chat and I can put them to Peyman. Then we'll make sure that anyone who puts their question in the chat will get the questions answered by email if need be. But no, I really enjoyed it, and I liked the way you framed it at the end, coming back to our practice as well as the theory. And I think that rigorous, systemic kind of lens that you took in this article was really very useful. And I'm just trying to have half an eye on the chat being monitored. But Peyman, what's next in this research for you? What's in this research program? Because I know this is one of many articles that you've been working on in this area.
Yeah, I'm still interested in the career adaptability research with young refugees, and yeah, I'm sort of designing in the process of getting ethical approval for another research to continue a bit further with a larger population and a bit of a more sort of interesting design to have two groups, one group to engage in some sort of workshop, and yeah, all those sort of things.
Fantastic. We've got one question through from Annie Morris, and they said, do you think it's more important to allow young people from refugee backgrounds to imagine careers that might be unrealistic for them?
Yeah, I think that's a very difficult question. I guess that depends a lot to their age, the readiness and the willingness, the resources that they have, and I guess to what degree they're aware of the possibilities. Because yeah, I know that many young refugees probably in Australia are probably very eager because they've been waiting for so long. They're very eager to get into some sort of a career that, as you phrase it, could be unrealistic for them. I'm not going to emphasize that. I'm probably going to outline the pathway for that. And I guess over time, they become more familiar with what it takes, for example, to get to that, unrealistic sort of career maybe, and sort of compromise by themselves. But I'll be more focused on what they can do and what to achieve that, and focus on the steps that are possible for them, and leave the realization of unrealistic to themselves. So that's thank you.
That's so useful, Peyman. Thank you so much. And there's some comments from John Woodend and Catherine Hando about thanking you for your presentation. And I might, there's a couple of questions that are coming through. We're probably at time, particularly as we wanted these to be real lunch snapshots, and it's really been a delicious bite of research. So I've really enjoyed myself. I'm going to hand back over to David and just thank you. My personal thanks, Peyman. It's been really a lovely lunch for me.
Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.